Imagine waking up to the thunder of iron chariots, the sky blackened by smoke, and knowing that by nightfall, your world would no longer exist. In the ancient Near East, when the banners of Assyria appeared on the horizon, hope vanished. And for the women of conquered cities, the true nightmare was only just beginning. The empire that inspired both awe and terror was the mighty Neo-Assyrian Empire. From towering capitals like Nineveh, kings ruled with an iron will and an even harsher reputation. Their victories were carved into stone reliefs, rows of prisoners, cities in flames, and endless tribute flowing toward the throne. When rulers like Ashurnasirpal II or Sennacherib launched campaigns, they did not merely seek land. They sought dominance. Total, unquestioned dominance. And war in the ancient world was not just about armies, it was about breaking entire societies. When Assyrian soldiers breached a city's gates, chaos followed. Men were often killed in battle or executed as rebels. But women were rarely granted death. Instead, they were counted, recorded, and marched away as living trophies of conquest. Long columns of captives, mothers clutching infants, young girls barely in their teens, elderly women leaning on one another, were forced to walk hundreds of miles. Relief carvings from Nineveh show prisoners bound together, their expressions frozen in carved stone. Behind them marched armored soldiers with spears and bows, symbols of a power that had crushed their homes. But why were women taken? In Assyrian strategy, deportation was a weapon. By uprooting populations, the empire weakened resistance. Captured women became laborers in foreign lands. Some were assigned to massive building projects, the grand palaces of Nineveh, temples rising toward the heavens, irrigation canals feeding royal fields. Their hands, once tending their own homes, now shaped monuments glorifying the kings who destroyed their cities. Others were absorbed into households as servants. In the capital, wealthy officials and nobles relied on captive labor. Women from distant lands brought with them unfamiliar languages, clothing styles, and customs. Assyria became a melting pot, but one forged through suffering. And then there was the royal court. The Assyrian palace was not merely a residence, it was a fortress of power. Within its walls existed a carefully controlled world of queens, secondary wives, and attendants. Some captive women were chosen for the royal harem. Life there was complex. It was not simply a place of luxury, it was a political arena. Women could rise in influence, especially if they bore sons who might inherit power. But they also lived under strict surveillance, guarded and regulated. For a captive woman entering the palace, fate was unpredictable. She might live in relative comfort compared to laborers outside, but she would never return home. Her identity would be reshaped by the empire. Yet not all captives were destined for palaces or estates. Some were relocated to distant provinces, forced to rebuild towns recently devastated by Assyrian campaigns. The empire thrived on relocation. Skilled weavers, musicians, healers, Assyria valued talent. Women with specialized skills could find themselves placed strategically where their abilities served imperial needs. The cruelty of Assyria was deliberate. Kings boasted in inscriptions about crushing rebellions and instilling fear. Psychological warfare ensured fewer uprisings. Stories of harsh treatment spread faster than armies. But history is rarely simple. Archaeological evidence suggests that deported populations were not always enslaved in chains forever. Over generations, many integrated into Assyrian society. They married, worked, raised children. Some even prospered. The empire's strength came partly from this blending of peoples. Still, the first generation, the women who watched their cities burn, carried scars no stone carving can fully show. Imagine a young woman from a Levantine city, torn from her family. Days blend into weeks as she marches east. She learns new words to survive. She lowers her eyes in the presence of guards. She remembers the scent of her mother's kitchen, the songs sung during harvest. Slowly, those memories fade under the weight of survival. In Nineveh, towering walls dwarf her. The palaces glitter with relief celebrating conquest, including the very campaign that captured her. Her story is carved in stone, but without her name. This was the paradox of Assyria: unmatched organization, architectural brilliance, military innovation, and a reputation for calculated brutality. For the empire, captive women were resources, labor, alliance, legacy. For the women themselves, they were survivors of a world turned upside down. And this was only the beginning of their story. The conquest ended in fire, but life did not end there. For many women taken by Assyrian forces, survival meant adaptation. The empire's machinery was vast and efficient. Under rulers like Tiglath-Pileser III and later Ashurbanipal, deportation became systematic policy. But what happened after the march? In Assyrian cities, records meticulously tracked rations given to workers, grain, oil, textiles. Tablets discovered by archaeologists show organized distribution systems. Captive women assigned to weaving workshops produced textiles that clothed soldiers and elites. Weaving was a crucial industry, and women were at its heart. Picture long halls filled with looms. The rhythmic clatter of threads becomes the soundtrack of a new existence. Supervisors monitor output. Children play nearby, growing up speaking Akkadian instead of their mother's tongue. Identity shifted with each passing year. Some women entered temple service. Assyrian religion was complex, centered around gods like Ashur and Ishtar. Temples required attendants, singers, and laborers. Though not equal to native elites, deported women sometimes found structured roles within these sacred institutions. And within the royal court, influence could quietly grow. Queens in Assyria held surprising authority. Royal women owned property, managed estates, and issued administrative orders. If a captive woman bore a royal child, her status changed dramatically. Her survival could translate into security for her offspring. But power came at a cost. Palace life was heavily guarded. Political intrigue was constant. Mothers maneuvered for their sons' futures. In a court where succession struggles could turn deadly, security was fragile. Outside palace walls, daily life demanded resilience. Markets bustled with traders from across the empire, Anatolia, Babylon, the Levant. Deportation unintentionally created cultural exchange. Recipes blended. Clothing styles merged. Music traveled across borders. Yet grief lingered beneath adaptation. Assyrian inscriptions rarely mention the emotional cost of empire. They speak of tribute, victory, obedience. But human lives are not numbers on clay tablets. Consider a mother teaching her daughter embroidery patterns from their homeland. In that quiet act, resistance survives. Culture persists in small, intimate gestures. Stories whispered at night keep memories alive. Over time, many deported communities formed distinct neighborhoods within Assyrian cities. They maintained partial traditions while contributing to imperial strength. The empire's diversity was both its weapon and its foundation. Ironically, the very system that crushed cities also relied on the talents of those it conquered. And then, the unthinkable happened. In 612 BCE, Nineveh fell. A coalition of Babylonians and Medes stormed the great capital. The empire that once inspired terror collapsed in flames. For descendants of captive women, this was another turning point. Some likely blended into successor states. Others may have returned west. Many simply became part of the shifting tapestry of Mesopotamian history. Empires rise with thunder, but they fall in silence. What remains are fragments, reliefs showing prisoners, tablets listing rations, ruins of palaces once filled with power. From these fragments, historians piece together lives once overshadowed by kings. The shocking fate of women in the Assyrian Empire was not a single story of cruelty, it was a spectrum of suffering, survival, adaptation, and, sometimes, unexpected resilience. They were marched as captives. They labored as workers. Some navigated palace politics. Many raised children who would never see the lands of their ancestors. And when Assyria itself fell, their bloodlines remained, woven invisibly into the history of the ancient Near East. The empire is gone. The king's boasts have faded. But the untold strength of the women who endured it still echoes through time.